as well as a discussion about Falls Lake watershed and development rules. We're going to start with the rezoning case, and I'll turn it over to staff to provide an overview, and then we'll have commentary from anyone here who's to speak on that case.
So Sarah Shaughnessy is coming to the podium.
Hi, good afternoon. Yep, Sarah Shaughnessy, Planning and Development. I'll just give a quick high-level overview reminder of this case, and then I understand the applicant is here with a presentation, and members of the public also have a presentation prepared. So this is a request to rezone 2 parcels totaling 1.9 acres from residential 4 to residential 4 mixed use, 4 stories with parking limited frontage, and a number of conditions, which I'll go over. The request is consistent with the 2030 comprehensive plan and the urban form map. It is inconsistent with the future land use map, which categorizes this area as office and research and development. Planning Commission has recommended approval unanimously. You opened the public hearing for this matter on March 19th. It was last discussed on July 2nd. So just a zoning map of the existing zoning in the area. As you can see, it's predominantly R4, industrial mixed use 3 stories, residential mixed use 3 stories, and residential mixed use 5 stories. And then an aerial view of the site. You can see it sits north of NC 54, west of Edwards Mill Road, and east of 40, again with some low scale and moderate scale residential development surrounding it, and then some more commercial and industrial to the south and west of the site. Some additional views of the site, looking into the neighboring subdivisions, and then at the site itself in the top left there. And then the zoning conditions, which have not been changed since March 21st, when they were discussed on April 2nd. Only residential uses shall be allowed as primary uses. All parking shall be located behind the building. The building setback from parcels with the 3 pins listed here, which are the parcels to the rear of the site, shall be 115 feet. The building setback from the primary street shall be a minimum of 20 feet. The maximum building height shall be 55 feet. Cross-access shall be provided to a parcel to the north and a parcel to the south. And then the last condition, the parking setback, again, from those 3 parcels to the rear of the site shall be a minimum of 30 feet. Again, Planning Commission has recommended approval. They found that the proposed zoning would increase the supply and diversity of housing types that could be built on this site. So happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Branch.
If this was a request to go to OS 5, would it be consistent all the way around at that point?
If there was a condition limiting residential uses, I think the inconsistency there is the office and residential, or office research and development
Right.
flume designation discourages residential uses.
Gotcha. So as long as it includes residential, that's what makes it inconsistent.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I'll point out that the existing R4 is also inconsistent with that future land use designation.
Okay. So its current zoning is inconsistent. So it's just inconsistent all the way around
Yeah.
as far as the flume.
Correct.
All right. Thank you. Correct. But that current zoning is inconsistent.
With the future land use map designation.
Councilmember Patton.
Hi, can you just go back to the setbacks? I think I missed one. Oh, so building setback.
So there's a, to the rear, a building setback from the rear, and then also a parking setback, which is condition number 7 on the next slide.
Okay, so the building setback is from the rear, and it's 115 feet. Okay, and the front setback is
20 feet.
Okay. Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Anyone who was wanting to speak on this case, could you raise your hand? I just want to see the numbers. So we've got 2, and I think you all are for the case, representing the case, and then we have 2 on the residential side. So I think we'll allow 8 minutes on both sides, and we can start with the team representing this case. And you can always save time if you would like for later.
Hello, members of the committee. Thank you for having us. I'm Ted Van Dyke. I'm the architect for the project. I've got Tony Tate, who's our landscape architect, and our land use attorney, Isabel Maddox, has just arrived. As a sort of intro, we do have some additional conditions. We did a third neighborhood meeting on July 23rd, heard concerns from the community, and have some additional conditions and some additional design guidelines that we're going to present today as a result of that meeting. And I will let Isabel take it from there, and if she needs me to come back up, we can certainly answer questions after that. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Isabel Maddox here on behalf of Rod Mangrum and Mark Annis, the prospective developers of this project. As Ted said, this case has been going on for a while, and we have met with the neighbors 3 times. I'm going to kind of go through a chronology, if I can get these slides to advance. Here we go. So let me go back. Okay, so this was initial neighborhood meeting was May of 2023. Case was submitted last August. 2 neighborhood meetings, January, December of this past year. 2 planning commission meetings, and we had a 3rd neighborhood meeting in July. The issues relate to the height of the building, the setback from the street, and what we offer to mitigate any impacts to the neighborhood. This neighborhood is changing a lot. If you've been down Nowell Road recently, you would see there's lots of development with apartments. There's 3 stories, but there's lots of 4, there's 5, there's even 7 stories on the corridor. There's a number of apartments. There's an office building which is 7 stories up on Trinity, and this street is tagged I think an urban transit corridor or growth transit emphasis corridor maybe, and it is in a city growth center. So the city envisions this being a growth area of the city. The Nowell Point neighborhood is a very lovely neighborhood that's to the I guess east of this property, and those are the neighbors we've been talking with the most. So we have filed conditions which limited height to 55 feet, provided for a setback of 20 feet from the right-of-way of Nowell, and address some other, a rear setback of 115 feet. So our building would be at least 115 feet from the rear property line, which abuts. There are 3 single-family neighborhoods that abut the rear of this property. There are some additional conditions that we would like to propose today, which we keep all those conditions, and then we add another sort of comprehensive condition that says if we do a 4-story building, which is what we're proposing, we would also agree to these additional conditions. And those are the setback, well, let's see, the setback from the homes, so the rear setback for this property would be at least 135 feet. So we're at 115 now, we're going to 135. The setback from the street, and this is something that several of the neighbors, primarily Bob Geary, who's been sort of the point of the neighborhood, has really wanted is a greater setback on the front. So we've increased, I think the code would require 10 or 15. We went to 20. Now we're offering 30 feet from the street, and I think that's what Bob has requested all along. So we hope he will be satisfied with that condition. The next one is a maximum building height of 50. Now we've talked about limiting to 50, and we've agreed to that for several months. We haven't put it in a filed condition, and we would be willing to file these as soon as we have some sort of a agreement. So 50 feet, which is the same height as a 3-story building. So as you know, in the lower heights, the buildings are measured both in terms of stories and absolute feet. So for a 3-story building, the absolute foot height is 50. And so we're saying we want 4 stories, but we'll do it in 50 feet. So we think it's really not a big impact in terms of the building dwarfing any single-family neighbors because it's a 3-story height. And also, we're such a great distance away from those properties. Other conditions that we propose to add include an enhanced buffer yard along the rear line. We've previously said 20 feet. We would go to a width of 25 feet with some enhanced plantings, which Tony Tate, I'll get him up here in a few minutes to talk about that, the plantings. And there's some specifics on that. I'll let him talk about that. We also would include a solid wood fence of 8 feet. The code requirement is 6.5. The neighbors to our immediate rear, there were at least one single-family neighbor that was represented at our last meeting. They very much wanted the taller fence. We agreed to that. And then finally, parking lot light fixtures. Those same neighbors asked about the parking lot light fixtures, and those can be up to 30 feet. There's a different requirement if they're closer to the residential, but we said we'll go with 15 feet across the board there. So keeping those light poles lighting the parking lots at a lower level, so it'll have less impact on those neighbors. So we think that's a lot of a fairly robust package of protections for the single-family neighbors. And you know, this is not like we're putting an industrial plant here. This is residents beside other residents. Yeah, it's a different form of housing, but they're still just people living their lives next to other people living their lives. And I will add that the neighborhood, the neighbors that we abut, have 30-foot rear setback themselves, and in the actuality, I think either my architect or landscape architect told me those buildings are closer to 60 feet from their rear line. So that's, you know, they could build another house closer, but they'd have to be at least 30. So you add their 30 and maybe another 30, because they're actually 60, to what we're proposing here of 135, and you've got almost 200 feet. And we have a graphic that shows some of those distances later in the presentation. Okay, so this is the rendered site plan that Mr. Tate prepared, and I'm going to let him come up and talk about the landscaping a little bit and a little bit about the layout here.
I'm going to add 2 minutes on both sides just so that y'all can finish.
Okay,
But do note the timing here.
Thank you. I want to leave a little bit of time for Mr. Van Dyke, but you know, the enhanced buffer screening on the back, that was a concern because that's the closest neighbors that we have there, and so we've increased that buffer to add some large evergreens in that zone and increase the width to provide for those. But the large evergreens are not part of the standard buffer, transitional buffer requirements, and so we've added those to that to get some larger, taller evergreen screening in that zone, and we've increased the fence height to 8 feet. So we've done a lot there. Unfortunately, there's a sewer stub that comes right to the middle of that buffer, and so it detracts from the plantings there. We can't plant in that, but I had a brief conversation with staff about potentially adding a gate across that opening, and they said they would entertain that at site plan. They wouldn't give us an answer today saying, yes, you can do that, but it's a possibility that we can ask for that in the future, and they would grant us to close up that opening on that. So the other plantings, setback in the front will give us more room to plant more green trees and evergreens in the front to help, you know, soften that building. So I do want to give Ted a few minutes to talk. So.
And I would add on that fence.
Speaking to the mic.
That if permitted by the city, we would have a span across that utility easement. It would include a gate so they could get into access.
And I'll be brief because I know you guys are going to have questions, and I know the neighbors, Bob and his neighbor, want to speak. But this is sort of this quick diagram. We looked at this last time. A lot of the character of the front of the building is going to have to do with whether the city widens the road or not. Right now, if we do our 30-foot setback, we're going to be 43.5 feet from the curb. When you add in the sidewalk, the plantings, and the required city setback, we will be almost 60 feet if the road is not widened and we leave everything as it is for now. So we've got a considerable buffer on the front. A lot of the character of this street is determined. It's traditionally rural, but we are a transit corridor and we're slated for growth. So our sidewalk, our plantings, and everything else will go where they're shown no matter what. It's just a question of whether or not we're going to have that widening or pay a fee in lieu. But we are prepared for that, and we're 30 feet from that line. So I'll stop there, and if you have questions, we can answer. Well, we have 3
Yeah, I'm
seconds.
sorry, we don't have any more time at this moment. Are there any questions for now from council members or? Okay, so now we're going to have this will be 10 minutes now. And it looks like Bob, you're going to start. Bob or Bruce?
My presentation. I was going to ask Ted to put up that illustration again, because what it shows is a much smaller building than what they have allowed themselves. But I'll start with my own presentation. Not just me asking for a larger setback in the front, a larger frontage in the back. We had our first neighborhood meeting last May, 15 months ago, and everyone who came said, prefer a 3-story building, prefer it to be back from the road farther because everything else on this road is farther back. So we asked them to maintain a continuous frontage. They said at that time they wanted to build 50 to 60 units of apartments, and we said, fine, that'll fit in a 3-story building on this site, and we won't object to it. Isabel said something about the lots that flank this property. The lots that flank this property are 1-story houses. They are R4 lots. So a 4-story building will crowd them out if they have to look up at it. So our position from the beginning has been the scale of this is too big. The conditions would allow a building that is 153,000 square feet or larger for a stated intention of building 50 to 60 units. The 4-story height proposal is incompatible with the R4 zoning all around, especially since the houses all around are 1-story or 2 stories. And for the 4th story, no affordable units are offered. The 20-foot setback is inconsistent with the built setbacks on Nowell Road. So what do I do? Click this thing? All right, so this is the allowed scale of the project according to the conditions. It's 20 feet back from the road. The depth of the 2 lots together is 462 feet. It's actually larger than that on the north side. They have allowed themselves to be within 115 feet of the rear properties, 20 feet from the road. They need 20-foot setbacks on each side, I believe. So a 320-foot distance, the depth of the building, and a 120-foot width of the building times 4 stories is 153,600 square feet. This is an elevation looking north. One of our neighbors did this for us. Nowell Road is on the left. Cedar water houses to scale are on the right, down the little ones on the bottom. There's quite a topographical change in this area. So you can see the relative size of a 50-foot tall building on the site versus the houses that are there, which are 2 stories. This is another view of the site. To the right, the houses that are there. The houses in the foreground that's actually pictures of the houses. It looks like there are a lot of trees in between those houses in the foreground and the proposed building, but actually those trees are 4 different R4 lots. So the backyards of the houses along Nowell Point Drive are not nearly as big as they appear from here. There are 4 building lots in between that are going to get squeezed by a building this big. And again, We don't object to an apartment building. We never have. We've said it should be 3 stories to be in concert with the neighborhood, which is 1-story houses and 2-story houses. All right. So we've asked, offer a green plus frontage as you applied to New Bern Avenue. That is an urban corridor, and it's a minimum of 30 feet from the right-of-way. We'd like the scale limited by offering a cap on square footage, consistent with a 50 to 60 unit apartment building. Not trying to put these guys out of business. We just would like to limit the scale of the possible building should they not build it, sell the property to somebody who doesn't really care about their neighbors. And we've asked them to revise the height to RX3 or to use an R10 zoning, which with missing middle rules would allow up to 55 apartment units in a 3-story building, 45 feet high. The missing middle changes reduce the required lot size per unit to allow 55 apartment units on this site, which is 87,000 square feet. And we've asked that if they build 4 stories in the front, it's not our preference, but if they do, step it down in the back. And the applicant's response, now these are crickets. And today, finally, they've responded, so I'm going to take these out. I'll take them right out. This is the area we live in. It is not urban. It is a rural area that is suburbanizing. But there are thousands of apartments out here on Nowell, Trinity, Edwards Mill, Corporate Center Drive. They're 3 stories. They're dense. They have landscaping in front of them. They're not intrusive. This is the Camden Asbury Apartments. They're 65 feet back from the road. This is the Dakota Apartments, Nowell Road, 3 stories, generous green frontage. This is looking west, so looking into the project, 3 stories. At the very back of this project, after you've gone down quite a grade, the buildings are 4 stories. These are the Raleigh West Vintage Apartments. They're 3 stories. They're 100 feet back from Corporate Center Drive. I don't want to kid you, there are taller buildings in this area. This is the Raleigh West Apartments. They're 4 stories. There's quite a grade change down, and in the back they're 5 stories. But they're 50 feet back from the road. This is our subdivision. We're 50 feet back from the road. These are the Milo Apartments. They're brand new. They're 3 stories. They're on the west side of Nowell Road at the intersection of 54. Somebody just said there were 7-story apartment projects on Nowell. That's not. Okay. Office. Milo Apartments, 3 stories. They are 36 feet back from the widened road.
Just checking. Do you want to leave any time for Bruce?
Yes, I am. I'm done.
Thank you.
Did I use up 7.5 minutes?
Can't shut them off.
That is bad form, my friend.
Hi, I'm Bruce Mamel, 904 Cedar Downs Drive. Thanks for having us today. I won't repeat what Bob had to say. I'm heartened that I only got 1 PDF from your in the email that you sent with the computer glitch. It didn't have anything in there about the lighting. And anyway, so we had talked about, Bob's been coming at this from the height and density angle, and I agree with that. I don't agree with the designation by the city for what this area is going to become. I just don't. I've been out there too long, seen too many changes. If the wind blows hard enough, it changes. Having said that, they increase the buffer in the back if they want 4 stories. They drop the lighting from 30 to 15 feet. They've got a variety of plantings. They mentioned in the last meeting that they were going to put the stormwater retention under the parking lot. So is that still a condition? Because that wasn't. I can speak to that. Well, it wasn't. Not a condition, no. Okay, well, that makes a big difference because then it gives them more surface area for a parking lot.
Still our intent, but we have a problem with making it a condition, just because we haven't done the geological testing.
Okay, so they were going to have an amenity yard to the north, and the way that diagram worked, it doesn't look like that's there. You could stick the amenity yard at the back of the parking lot instead of on the side there on Nowell. You know, I mean, that's just an idea. We spent we spent a year talking about this, and, you know, it's the 11th hour, and they want to get their zoning passed, so now they want to give us some conditions. Okay, at the last meeting, we still didn't get anywhere at all. So this just got dropped in our lap today about 45 minutes ago, which is, I mean, you know, we're capable of making snap decisions, but I don't think that the question of the square footage has been resolved. I don't know exactly what you'd be voting for. That's my question. What exactly are you voting for if you're going to give them the conditions that they initially wanted? Because it's a very large structure, and can I finish my sentence?
You can finish the sentence.
It's a large structure, and if that's allowed, and then, you know, some of the cases here pass, and the next day they get sold, and then it just becomes administrative site review, and whatever goes, goes. So, you know, maximum flexibility,
Thank you,
minimal
Bruce.
options. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all. I've got a couple follow-up questions based on this conversation. I do believe we're actually relatively close here, and this helped me understand just the issues back and forth on each side. I hope it's helping our committee. We'll eventually provide, I hope, some recommendations back to council. A couple of questions actually for staff to just make me understand. So I see that the maximum number of units is 57 according to the staff report. Is that true?
Yeah, that's an estimate based on the envision analysis done at the time that the case was reviewed by Planning Commission. I think they have since adjusted the building height down, but functionally, at the time that, you know, prior to this meeting, it was still 4 stories. So I think it's still relatively accurate. It's still an estimate, but yes.
Okay, so I just want to put that out there, that 57 units is likely the max here. So that's where that number comes from, the 50 to 60. I'm going to keep talking for a little bit, then we can have some discussion. I also wanted to ask about the green plus frontage. How would that differ from what's being offered?
So, yeah, let me pull that up here. The green plus frontage requires a build to, which is a little bit different than a building setback. It's a requirement for a certain percentage of the building's facade to be located a specific distance from the street rather than the full building facade from the distance. So the primary street build to under the green plus frontage is between 30 and 50 feet. So that would be from the primary street. And there's a requirement that at least 50% of the building's facade front that street, so be within 30 to 50. Primary street-facing access is required, so pedestrian access. There are, I think functionally it is very similar to the parking, the frontage that's already included.
The main thing would be
that's the
that
main difference.
30-foot setback
Yes.
requirement. Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments from council members? Councilmember Patton.
Yeah, I have a question for staff. Can you verify the comments made about height on RX3 versus RX4 zoning by the code?
Yeah, I believe what the applicant shared with you is accurate. Let me pull up my notes here. So for R4, the current zoning, the height is 3 stories and 40 feet. For RX4 with no conditions, it would be 4 stories and 68 feet. So what they had initially proposed prior to today was 4 stories and 55 feet, and now they're proposing to decrease to 50 feet, which is the height for RX3.
That is,
Yeah.
okay. And then Isabel, can you, whatever you were going to say about the stormwater, can you address that?
Yes, my clients have every intention of putting the stormwater underground and would like to do that. It's actually, it's better for the project to have it underground. But without doing the exploration, the physical exploration, we don't know if it's rock or what we're going to hit down there. So we're really concerned about offering a condition to require it to be there. But it is the intent, and it really is better for the project. So I think we have an incentive to make that happen. And I mean, Ted or Tony can discuss that with you, and I think they would tell you the same thing. We've discussed it as a team as to whether we could do that condition, and we're just concerned that we commit to something and we go there and hit rock, and you don't have room to put it. So that's the only reason we haven't put it as a condition.
And so in that scenario, if it were rock, as you say, then where would
It would be
stormwater control
somewhere
device go?
between the back of the building and the rear line.
And realize. Okay.
And you have, does either of you have any ideas about what would be an alternative stormwater device if you couldn't go underground?
It would most likely be a bioretention basin. It would be located, has to be back there in the back because that's where the lowest part of the site is. And so that would take away from surface parking. So that's the generator for us is if we put it underground, we can gain more parking and we don't have that above ground feature that takes up land. But if we couldn't put it underground, it'd have to be a bioretention pond probably in that back part of the lot.
And do you have any reason to think there is rock? Do you have any reason to believe you might not be able to accomplish that?
I'll let Tony answer that one too.
Well, it's rock or the depth of the seasonal high water table. There's a lot of things in the ground that could affect that system going underneath the ground. And if it was a pond, you could raise the grade up and build a dam and keep it above grade or above those features. But all those things that are underground that we just don't know about make it difficult to commit to that and saying we have to do that. So again, it's our intent because we just gain more parking spaces by doing it that way.
And just to confirm, there's no, like, y'all will only have to build to the 2 and 10 year storms. There's no documented downstream flooding. Do you know?
Not that I know of.
We're draining into the state's fairground.
Please, everyone speaking to the mic when you're speaking. Thank you.
Apologize. The land drains to the northeast, which is the old fairgrounds dump, I believe is what it was. And so we don't see any downstream flooding issues or backwater.
I'm good for now.
Councilmember Branch.
So for me and just the neighbors, what I'm hearing based on the conditions that you heard today, we're closer to what you all would like to see. Is the stormwater the biggest issue left? I want to see, based on the conditions that were recommended today, what are outstanding concerns that you all may have? Other than not wanting it. What? I'm checking with you.
Thank you. That's a good question, and we are closer, I think. The stormwater, I agree with what they said. Until you try to bang away at the earth there, you don't know what's underneath. There is a lot of granite in our area, so I would not be surprised if they hit it right below the surface, but they might not. I know I've been out there with a pickaxe in my backyard, and I don't have to swing 3 times before I hit a big piece of rock, which I use for walls. So that works out. I think the biggest issue that remains is the one that Jane asked about, Councilwoman Harrison, about the allowed
Frontage.
number of units. I don't know how the Envision software works, honestly. I do know that the graphic that Ted showed of the proposed building is an illustration that isn't accurate with the conditions. The conditions allow a much bigger building. I think that their new condition today reduces the allowed square footage of the building from 153,000 square feet to 143,000 square feet. Now, if an apartment unit is 900 square feet, plus 10% for the hallways, that's 143 units. That's not 57 units. So I don't know how that works. And all I've suggested is take the illustration you showed us, measure it, increase it by, I don't know, 20%, and put a square footage limit on your building so that It can't be gigantic, just in case you don't build anything. I think that's the biggest issue.
Can I
also-
ask staff to respond to that about how Envision does that analysis and just the square footage question?
Sure. So we use a software. It's a scenario planning tool called Envision Tomorrow, and we plug in sort of the inputs, the site area minus any area that is undevelopable because of utility easements. I don't think any of that was present, but we sort of look at the existing conditions on the site. We make an assumption about the unit size. I think in this case, we estimated that on average units would be 1,000 square feet each, recognizing that that's variable, and then plug it into the software, and then it gives us a unit total based on the inputs that we, the size of the site and any building constraints.
Councilmember Branch.
So if we were to approve this based on this documentation that says the max number of units is 57, that's the max they could do, correct? Or could they do, how does that work?
The Envision is an estimate. It's not a binding zoning condition. It does, so it wouldn't work the same way.
So the issue is with, what I'm hearing from the residents, the size, the conditional use possibly could yield more, but the developers at this time are saying that they're only going to build to a certain thing. Is that the caveat?
From what I understand, I mean, I guess we could add a condition, or if that would be an option, if you all know you're going to stick to 60 units or less, or whatever the number is, that might be a way to solve this. I'm seeing nods from Ted. I don't know what Isabel thinks about that.
Is that possible to get to?
I think Luke is driving that.
Okay,
Can you pull
Luke.
up his presentation?
Love to take a look at that, and then I'll let Isabel chat with you. I think that is possible. I think the difference between what Bob is talking about and what we've been presenting, and I'll tell you, the first site plan we sent showed the neighbors, and up till this one, which was our last one, actually had a big stormwater pond back there. And when we realized that we wanted to tighten the site up, we wanted to maximize our usable area and still be able to get these additional buffers and additional setbacks, we propose a scenario that doesn't have a stormwater pond. We hope we can do it. If not, that back parking back there will probably go away, and we'll have a bioretention feature. The difference is really this. You see the buffers, you see the amenity area up here we've got to put in, you've got to have a driveway, you've got to have setbacks, you have to have sidewalks to the public way. The amenity area has to be accessible from the public way, it can't be in the back. This is a standard parking layout. There's our buffers that we've agreed to, 6.5-foot fence, 8-foot masonry wall at the front because we're slightly closer. This is actually a church on this side, not single family. So we've made a lot of commitments, but just by way of explanation, many of the limits to the project are just simple where you can't build and what you got to put on the site to make it work. So Bob is absolutely right that the area that they've shown is much larger than the building you can build, but that's always the case. We may decide to put this building, well, we could put some parking down the side and make it longer and narrower. We could decide that we want 2 buildings and that they're going to both be smaller and the parking's between them. We have not fully developed this project because we don't have a zoning approval. I'll leave it there because I think there's been some conversation about the unit count. Thank you.
Can I say something quickly? Property on the south,
Can you come to the mic, please?
property on the south is not a church. It is owned by the church, but it's forest.
Okay, I have consulted with my client on the number of units, and I think we'd be willing to make a condition of 65 units. I mean, that's a little bit higher than the Envision, and we really probably won't get there. But if that would be something that would, be acceptable for council committee, then we'd be willing to add that as a condition.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful if there's concern about this. May as well just make it clear. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
We're getting close. I see Councilmember Branch.
Yeah, so my question is, and this is kind of, I guess, for our attorney, if they want to add sign conditions, it's a 10-day rule, correct? All right, so that means if we report this out on the 3rd, it can't come, the fastest it could come back to us would be the 17th of September.
For you to vote on the conditions.
to vote on it.
I believe that's, because it's Tuesday. The
Right.
Next, a week from today
yeah.
is the, so you could report it out, defer it to the 17th. They would have until next Friday to submit revised unsigned zoning
Correct.
conditions.
In order to see it on
And then
this.
get staff comments and then submit signed conditions the next week. Then
And you
could take
did
it-
defer the public hearing to the 17th.
17th already. Okay,
I
cool.
thought it was a further deferral.
Mr. Geary, if you have something else, you can come up.
I think the way they've written the new condition is to have the 30-foot setback in the front, but only if it's a 4-story building. Can we get that rewritten to have a 30-foot setback in the front, regardless of whether it's 3 or 4 stories or 2 stories?
How about this? That sounds like a conversation that you all need to have. We're not going to vote on what your conditions are today because, that's the conversation y'all have to have.
Councilmember Black?
Oh, I was just gonna say, it seems like the two things that can come back conditionally can come back when they come back, and I'm comfortable with the case. And I think you guys have done a lot to be amenable to the residents.
Councilmember Patton?
Yeah, and I think for the purposes of, this has to be reported out today in order to be heard again on the 17th. And so I think for the purposes of moving this out of this step so it can sort of rejoin its stream, I think many compromises have been made to get closer to what the existing residents are hoping for, including lighting. I appreciate the third neighborhood meeting. It sounds like this is coming a lot closer in line with what you're ultimately hoping for, although perhaps not 100%. But I would be comfortable moving this out of committee with a recommendation of approval contingent on the signed zoning conditions that match what we've seen here and the unit cap that you have offered.
Do you want to make that a motion, Councilmember Patton?
Sure, so moved.
Second.
All in favor? Okay, that was unanimous. Thank you all for being here and for your time and effort. We are going to move on to our next action item, which is a review.
Chair, really quickly, I just
Yes,
want to make for the clerk's benefit. So the motion was to recommend approval to the full council, assuming that zoning conditions are presented that reflect the changes that were discussed today, and then added additional consideration for capping the number of units. Is that?
And yeah, my only hesitant in the wording, and I still voted for, is they may have a conversation and come up with some other stuff. I don't know, but I want to give them that space.
I just want to make sure the clerk gets
Yeah.
accurate representation.
So that's all
So
I'm
I
saying.
think-
I just want to make sure
I think-
y'all have that space. I don't want us to say these are it because there's still conditional conditions that you have to do.
So I think we can say with consideration of the discussion and including the unit cap. I just want to
Right.
make sure that we've captured the spirit, or that the clerk does.
Gotcha.
Yeah, sort of including but not limited to
Right.
the discussion today, or something like that.
Okay, thank you all. Good to see you. All right, our next item, Falls Lake Watershed Development Rules. I believe, Tansy, we're going to have a staff presentation first.
We do. So Ed Buchan is coming to the table from Raleigh Water. Ed has collaborated with staff in stormwater and the planning department. I do want to recognize that Forrest Westall is here. Do want to recognize Forrest's long-standing service to the region and great partnership with the city. So Ed this is coming as a follow-up discussion to the discussions you had at Committee on Z 4023. And that discussion, you did want to learn a little bit more about the regional efforts in the Falls Lake watershed and some of the development patterns that exist in the watershed today. So thank you to Ed for collaborating with some of his peers. We do have representatives from some other departments if there's questions, and I'm certain that Mr. Westfall is available for questions as well.
Thank you, Tansy. Again, my name is Ed Buchan. I'm Assistant Director with Raleigh Water. I do manage the water treatment plants and water distribution divisions for us, and I'm also one of the liaisons for the Upper Neuse River Basin Association. So I'm going to give you a very condensed version of what has happened with the Upper Neuse River Basin Association over really the past 15 years almost. Some of this I know Council Member Harrison will have seen, so apologies in advance for that, but hopefully this will be new for the rest of you. So just a little cracking the code on all the acronyms that we tend to use. UNRBA is the Upper Neuse River Basin Association, which is a fancy way of saying the Falls Lake watershed. So this is basically, we're drawing a watershed line at the dam at Falls Lake, right off Falls of the Neuse Road, and it goes all the way up into all the different counties that you see on this map. So that's Person County, Granville County, Orange County, Durham. So it's a pretty big watershed, 770 square miles. And something I do like to point out here is you see Raleigh in the very bottom corner right beside the menu. We have very, very little jurisdiction in the Falls Lake Basin. It's a little bit unusual that our main water supply, which provides roughly 80% of our drinking water, we have hardly any influence on from a zoning perspective. There's a little bit that you're, of course, aware of, but mostly we're reliant on the other members upstream to enforce their zoning requirements and to help protect our water supply. And I should also mention that we're the only municipality that withdraws water from Falls Lake. The other municipalities do get water from the basin, but none of them have a straw, so to speak, in Falls Lake. That's just us. So anyway, the UNRBA is essentially, I think it's best categorized as a planning organization that's made up of all the municipalities that are located in the basin, and we have a lot of other stakeholders that frequent our meetings with soil and water conservation groups, environmental groups. Ag is also a big part of our conversations as well. So it's really a basin-wide approach to water resource management. So now I'm going to try to summarize the Falls Lake rules. And I'm going to get back in the Wayback Machine and go back to basically the mid-2000s when Falls Lake was deemed to be an impaired water, namely for something called chlorophyll A, which is a type of algae, and they can measure it, and it's basically a surrogate for nutrients. The thinking is algae likes nutrients, so if you have high levels of algae, typically you're going to have high levels of nutrients. So it was found in violation of the state standard in several different sites along Falls Lake. So it's kind of a smaller version of the Neuse estuary, if you're familiar with that, and how that has a formal nutrient management rule that has been generated by the EPA. This is a surrogate for that the state has passed in 2011 to reduce nutrient loads into Falls Lake. And so that's been ongoing, and they divided up the effort into really two different stages. There's stage one, where they wanted a reduction in nitrogen and phosphorus of 20% nitrogen, 40% phosphorus, based on a model that was done looking at 2006 as the baseline year. And so this was a model that was done a long time ago, and like all models, none of them are perfect, and so they did the best with what they had at the time to figure out what those reductions should be. But they also recognized that these reductions were significant, so they were going to need to take a timeout at some point in the future, where we're at now, quite frankly, to look at a next level of reductions. And so when it was initially developed, it was 20% nitrogen, 40% phosphorus, stage one. Stage two, an even larger reduction was going to be envisioned. And that the bullet kind of second to the bottom kind of summarizes a lot of the reductions that we've seen so far. There were a lot of point sources from our upstream neighbor. These are wastewater treatment plants. They have all made significant improvements on their nutrient discharges, just like Raleigh has done for the Neuse River. So that was where a lot of that reduction came from in stage one. And this is a sort of a graphical or chronology of how we got here today about the Falls Lake rules and how the UNRBA has really been sort of the mediator between the regulated community and the state of North Carolina Division of Water Resources. So they've kind of acted as again, a regional planning group to help guide this process. Oftentimes when you have environmental regulations, it's hard to get the regulated and the unregulated people in the same room, which I think the UNRBA has largely been very effective with. So they started with planning efforts in 2011. They collected a lot of monitoring data in those intervening years between 2014 and 2018. And like with any model that you're using, the more data, the better. So that was a key effort here. And we also, there was other data coming in from our own consultants from Raleigh and from the state of North Carolina. And so once that modeling was done, we were able to get a better idea of how the lake actually works, how that watershed works, and they were able to develop some recommendations about how to make sure that we protect that critical drinking water source. And I should mention too, that Falls Lake has more than one designation. That, you know, I tend to think about it as only a drinking water resource, but there's 4 other things that Falls Lake does. As we just saw with Hurricane Debbie, it acts as flood control. You know, it went up 8 feet to contain a lot of that water from Debbie, so it's very important from that perspective. They also basically recreate the Neuse River right there at the dam, and that all that water coming out of the dam tail race there is there to maintain ecological life in the Neuse River and for drinking water supply for our downstream neighbors in Johnston County and Kinston and so on. It's wildlife habitat, so it's for recreation as well. So there's a lot of things that Falls Lake, and, you know, for those of you familiar with the area, Lake Jordan, same thing. So it's not just water supply, but that obviously is near and dear to our heart here in Raleigh. So where we're at now is that we've basically finished and checked all the boxes that we can for stage one. A lot of the low-hanging fruit has been acquired from a nutrient reduction standpoint. So we're looking at stage 2 now and what those next steps need to be. So I just said, you know, a lot of the reductions have already happened. Overall, the lake water quality in Falls Lake has stabilized and improved compared to what it was in previous years, which is a great thing. And we wanted to keep it like that. We tell people all the time, we're going to be in the water treatment business forever. We're never stopping. So we want that lake to be there for forever. So it's important to maintain that water quality. And along those lines, you'll see that little pie chart there. What's interesting to note there is that 75% of the Falls Lake watershed is still undeveloped. It's not all forest, it's a mix, but that's a good thing. I will always say Mother Nature is undefeated when it comes to water quality, and will always be that way. We have lots of ways to help with water quality. We have wastewater treatment plants, we have stormwater SCMs, and those are great. But in the end of the day, a protected watershed is a healthy watershed. And I, you know, my friend here, Forrest Westall, is from Western North Carolina, and he can speak to this. I always highlight one of the reservoirs that serves Asheville, that is surrounded by Pisgah National Forest. So there's hardly even a sidewalk in that area. It's just woods, and it makes it a lot easier from a treatment perspective that you have this natural watershed. And I'm not intimating that Falls Lake is like that. We understand there is development, and that's just part of living in an area that's growing fast. But as much as we can, we want to maintain that 75% undeveloped area. So part of the recommendations that I'll get to the next slide is that we really have, you know, in a lot of ways squeezed all the blood out of the turnip from a nutrient reduction. All the low-hanging fruit has been taken up. So we need to think of new ways to figure out how to protect Falls Lake. So this is where we get into a different type of approach. Normally, when you think about nutrient reduction plans, it's very much an accounting exercise. You're just thinking, all right, according to this model, if we reduce by X percentage, we should get this water quality result. And it's just a model. It doesn't necessarily mean you're actually going to get that. And in fact, that's what some of the studies have shown us, is that the reductions really just aren't feasible in stage 2. These additional reductions that were initially created when the Falls Lake rules first came out. So, and again, we have an opportunity to rethink about how we look at this, that maybe the accounting system isn't really the best way to do it. So we've thought about a different way through the UNRBA, which is an investment-based system. Essentially, in a very general sense, it's like anything we can do to protect water quality, even if it's not a clear way to recognize a nutrient reduction, is helpful. And that as long as we're moving the ball forward in terms of some sort of water quality improvement, it can be any number of things. One of the most common examples that we like to point out and support is land conservation. And I'll get into that later in this presentation, but we feel like land conservation, again, is the best way to protect water quality in Falls Lake. And all of the members have been giving money to this new investment-based approach to do different projects, and we've partnered with them on some of these to conserve land. So we feel like anything that can help us preserve more land in Falls Lake is a step forward. And it's also something that hopefully our upstream neighbors are amenable with as well. But we're still in a negotiation standpoint in a lot of ways with the state of North Carolina Division of Water Resources and a lot of our stakeholders with the UNRBA to define what that happy place is in terms of next steps for stage 2. So I mentioned land conservation. 75% of that watershed is still undeveloped, and we want to be able to try to, whether it's through zoning or through land conservation programs like the one we have, try to protect those areas as much as we can, especially areas around streams and wetlands and things like that. It's just no different than a lot of development you guys see all the time. You need buffers around streams, and we want to make sure those buffers are maintained. And we think there's still value in uplands. The buffers are great for streams, but so are the uplands. It's a little less direct, but we still feel like there's a lot of value in those. So this has been a big focus of the UNRBA is how to get sort of like to monetize the value, if you will, of land conservation. So that brings me to our own watershed protection program, which was started in 2006. Mayor Meeker and the council at that time worked with some of our local land trust partners to establish this program. This precedes the Falls Lake Nutrient Management rules. So we kind of got a crystal ball out and said, we want to protect Falls Lake. This was not required by the city of Raleigh, so this is a very proactive volunteer effort that is still one of the big bragging points about that we use as a utility, that very few other utilities and other cities in the country have taken this approach. And we use land trust to act as our proxy to go help identify projects, bring those projects to the table, find other funding partners so that hopefully we're not the only ones throwing money at it, which they've been very successful at. We'd rather use land trust partners, they know the lay of the land, than having me go knock on doors. So, so far, we think it's been a very successful program. And we've gone through different iterations of ways to identify places that we want to conserve. And so, in fact, we're getting ready to start this process again to kind of fine-tune the model that we use to identify those properties. And a lot of them are going to be areas that are adjacent to streams and wetlands, and then we get the most bang for our buck from a nutrient reduction standpoint. We estimate how many nutrients are avoided. Now, it's very much an estimate. We're assuming, and like in most cases, the best ultimate use for a property is residential commercial development. So we're kind of saying we think that if this was developed in a residential neighborhood, this is what the nutrient inputs would be. So by having a forested area, we can help mitigate that. So these are the 4 different categories that we use, and it's basically we use the dot exercise. You've probably done it before, where everybody puts dots on what their favorite most valued pieces of protection are, and then we've developed a model to identify all those areas in the basin. And it looks like that. It's a publicly available model. The detail on this isn't great, but it's a GIS-based model. You can just zoom in on any property in the Falls Lake Basin and find out what it would score in our model. And our model score is basically 0 to 10, although it's basically a logarithmic scoring system, and you have to have a 4.2 or higher to qualify for funding. But any property that does score a 4.2 or higher is a very valuable property. And something else I should mention is that when we're reviewing these projects with our review team, we try to also determine if there's real development threat. And it's hard to predict that. You never know exactly where that will go. But we look at the distance from existing utilities and try to look at some of the master planning from other communities to say, this one is probably something we should probably take off the table as soon as we can, versus some other one that maybe not be at the same level of risk. So we try to look at a lot of different things when we're evaluating these projects. And the little yellow, I guess they're balloons, represent all the projects that we've been able to do here in the Falls Lake Basin. And we've done a few as well, I should say, in the Swift Creek Basin that's around Lake Benson and Lake Wheeler. But the vast majority of them have been in Falls Lake. And so and you can tell we've worked all over the basin. We've just recently had some in Person County, which has been sort of the last holdout in terms of working in that county, but we've been able to do that. And we've developed great partnerships with a lot of the open space programs in other counties, also with Camp Butner. There's a lot of military funding set aside to help preserve land and create a buffer around that camp. So we've really found a lot of great relationships with our upstream neighbors. And here's what we've accomplished to date. A lot of these you've probably seen on occasion during your council meetings, and so we've been very fortunate to be able to leverage a lot of other funding dollars over the years. Our program is funded by ratepayers, so it's 15 cents per 1,000 gallons. All of that money goes into our program fund, which is usually about $2.5 million a year. And I think a lot of these land conservation projects can be complicated because they can stretch on for years, and there's different errors involved and trying to get all the funding lined up. So a lot of times it takes a long time to bring it finally for you guys to vote on. But as you can see, we've done a lot since 2006. And again, the nutrients avoided, again, that's an estimate. We don't really exactly know what would have happened with that property or when it was, but given the development pressure of the triangle area, we feel like a lot of these were going to be developed, in a pretty short time frame. So that's all I had for my slides. Again, as Tansy mentioned, we have folks from Stormwater and the UNRBA here, so be glad to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Ed, for the overview. Any questions from council members? Councilmember Branch?
Just a couple. First of all, thank you. It's good to see this information again. I remember some, it hasn't been in a couple years, I think almost 4 years, since we gave approval of purchase, spending money to purchase some land. So I look forward to us continue to do some protection. But my question around, I know we talked about nutrients and making sure the water's clean. One of the challenges I see is discharge and the discharge rate. Is there anything we're doing to combat that? Because we can have, say it's 100% clean, but if it's a lot of water, those are some of the pressures we're facing in southern Raleigh and in areas of the city. Is there anything we're doing to work towards that, to address that as well from our northern partners?
So is that revolving around flooding issues,
Correct.
Things like that? So when it comes to Falls Lake, they do protect a lot of the homes. Just downstream of the dam, and so they hold back a lot of water. And by way of example, like last week, they were releasing 5,000 to 6,000 cubic feet per second. But prior to that, it was less than 100 cubic feet per second during the storm. So they were able to kind of mitigate the flooding. There's been times in the past where some of the properties, I forgot the neighborhoods' names right there along the Neuse River, that have flooded. And so the Corps of Engineers that's one of their priorities, is to kind of minimize that when they can. And ultimately, you know, they're also trying to help our downstream neighbors too, like Goldsboro and places like that. But yes, they have been able to hold back a lot of water. They're still releasing a lot of water now. And they're trying to get that lake, it's almost down to normal full pool now. But it's tricky for them during hurricane season. We've been lucky, quite frankly, that we've had a pretty quiet time. Overall, we've had Debbie, but other than that, it's been quiet. They can get in trouble when they have them back to back to back, which has happened here before, but not lately. But they do, I think, a good job on minimizing the flood issues just below the dam.
And my last question is, what are some things we can ask, like, so the Neuse doesn't flow north, thankfully.
Yeah.
But because it does flow south, you know, a lot of the development and things that we do is south of a lot of this protection. So what are some things, is there some education and things that we can start putting back out into our community, and maybe through our water bills, since this is utilities, to educate them on how to protect the Neuse River and other creeks and streams from, you know, crazy nutrients, so we won't have these spills like we just had in Wake Forest?
There's a lot to unpack there.
Sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's fine. So we're always happy to put things in the bill inserts. And we work with our stormwater partners and any of the other city departments that have information. We're glad to do that. I know I used to participate in something called Creek Week. It was sort of a triangle area effort to kind of bring attention to preventing pollution in the creeks in your neighborhood. So this is, so that's one of the disconnects that we were challenged with, is that, to your point, most of our protection that what the utility is involved with is upstream. And, you know, and we don't get water out of Crabtree Creek or Walnut Creek or anything like that. So we have, you know, less focus there from a utility standpoint. But we still understand the value of protecting those streams. We're environmentalists. We love streams and want them to be clean. So I think we have partnered in the past with Stormwater. I know we have on Creek Week to kind of highlight some of the things you can do. We can use social media. You know, when I used to do it, I used to talk about picking up dog waste, and there's, you know, clever ways you can try to make that a good message. So we're always able to do that. But again, that's also part of probably what Stormwater would want to say. And to your point about the spill in Wake Forest, we were talking with our new communications manager today about that, and how to try to get people to start thinking about, if you smell something, if you see something, tell somebody. Sort of the same thing about the concept. If you smell a really strong sewer smell, especially for a couple days, please call us. Please call somebody. Because it seemed like that may have gone on for an extended period of time, which is a little surprising given the number of people that are in that area. But yeah, we're always open to new creative ways to get that message out.
All right, thank you.
Councilmember Patton?
Hi, thanks for this. I have a couple questions. And so, as Tansy noted, this is here as a sort of a follow-up, further education from a case that we saw that was at the edge of the watershed. And I think you've addressed this, but just to make sure I'm to clarify and put a fine point on it, not every parcel in the watershed is created equally, right? There are some that are more valuable and more vulnerable than others. Is that right?
Yeah, and I will volunteer this as well. We've also worked with the consultant that did the Falls Lake model and has updated that model, Brown and Caldwell, to use basically the same format and the same criteria, that if we ever have another project like Z4023, what we'll be able to do is put it in that model and kind of show, all right, these are the nutrient outputs for different development scenarios based on what their proposed stormwater SCMs are. Now, and sometimes you don't know exactly what they're going to do from a stormwater perspective, but we can make some educated guesses. So that's just a way that council and others and the planning commission members can see a little more information about this. And I would be remiss if I didn't say also that I've talked a lot about nutrients, but when we talk about water quality, nutrients is just one piece of it, and algae is certainly something that we want to be able to keep control of. But there's other things. There's microplastics. There's animal waste. There's all sorts of. There's litter. There's things that generally are associated with more dense development that will impact water quality, almost regardless of what kind of protections you have. So those are hard to model. But we want to make sure that people are aware that those are other impacts that are, again, they're not usually regulated in the traditional way, but they are important to us.
That makes sense. Is there a goal for how much land you hope to acquire in the watershed area?
30,000 acres by 2045. So,
That's
yeah,
the goal.
I will not be here by then, but yeah, that's a lofty goal, but I think it is actually something that we can accomplish. And I should mention too that that's also partnering with, a lot of the land on Camp Butner is going to be just empty woods, and so there's a lot of preserved areas around Falls Lake, and of course there's the buffer that the Corps owns as well. So we think we have a good shot of that, and the funding was going to increase over time because it's kind of based on how much water we sell, and it's finally starting to click up. So we're getting a little more revenue for that program, and if you kind of plan it out, we're going to have a lot more revenue at some point. So.
And then, I was curious, you mentioned, sorry, this is my last question, I'll pass the mic. You mentioned that a big part of reducing the nutrients was that our upstream neighbors had to modify their wastewater treatment operations. I'm curious, did they have to do that on their own dime? Did we provide funds since we are the beneficiaries of that, or can I?
It's a good question. No, we didn't give them any money to do that. That was, the way that the federal Clean Water Act reads is technically the polluter pays. And so that, you've probably heard about PFAS. That's the whole crux of that argument, who pays for that. And, the real traditional view is the producer of the pollutant pays for it. So along the same lines, Durham and South Granville Water Sewer Authority, they all had to cover that themselves, just like we did to meet the Neuse River rules. We had to pay a lot of money to get our nutrient limits down on all our 3 wastewater plants. So.
Thanks.
I'll just add to that, and I think this is kudos to Forrest. I think probably members of this table don't know, when I first came to the city of Raleigh, I worked with Raleigh Water, so have been at the table in many of these conversations. And I do think that many of the efforts that Ed talked about were to be reasonable partners, to recognize the affordability challenges, and to try to get a plan in place that was practical and affordable for everybody in the region. So I just want to give credit that we have certainly advocated for the city's interests throughout those conversations, but I think those conversations have also been measured in trying to be good regional partners.
Yeah, I think if you push too hard, they might not do anything, or they would fight. So I think there's been hopefully a reasonable balance that we've been able to strike.
Councilmember Black?
Hi. So I know that protecting our drinking waters and some of our river basin has been of a concern, specifically with working with some of our county partners and some of the advocates on city councils in other regions. And you talked about He talked about the work with the other counties and the other areas, and as well as Camp Butner, which I just found out about recently. I didn't know we had one so close to the area. So I wonder if you could talk more about that and like what sort of processes or conversations are taking place and what we can be stronger on in working with our partners, because I know I can't remember exactly which area it is, but a lot of it is in Durham County and not in Raleigh.
Right. I mean, a lot of our projects have been in Durham County. So we've partnered in many cases with Durham's open space program, which is similar to Wake County's open space program. Now they have slightly different goals in that a lot of times they're trying to look at it from a recreational standpoint, but oftentimes they'll overlap. You know, if they're going to talk about trails or something like that in a natural area, we can definitely work with them, and we have. And I should also mention that we've finally managed to convince Durham to create a sister program to our watershed protection program that is funded by ratepayers. It's not the same amount as ours. Yeah, it's been a little bit of an uphill battle for them, but they've been making progress. My counterpart in Durham is continuing to push for additional funding, but we now work together. I think it's maybe a couple $100,000 a year. But hopefully over time they will continue to improve on that, and we're trying to be the leaders. This is extremely important to us because it's our water. Yes, and so we should be leaders, I think. And so and I should also mention another example in Durham County is a project that we did a couple years ago called Earth Seed Farm, which was
Oh, I was just there.
okay. Well, then you know
Yes.
all about it. So that's an example of things that we were trying to identify, which is it was an historically black-owned farm, and they want to keep it in the family. So we're able to do that and put an easement over it and help with some funding. And it's a wonderful place. If you've not gone, it's really neat. You can
Definitely
arrange.
check it out, y'all.
Yeah, it's really cool. And that's something else that we also try to work with is a lot of the farmers in the Falls Lake Basin, we'd rather it be a farm, whether it's hopefully, there's not really many industrial farms, if any, left in the Falls Lake Basin. And a lot of them will come to us and they don't necessarily want to, make it a development, but they're willing to put an easement over it so that we'll protect the buffers on that farm around creeks. We've helped them fence cattle out of the creek, which is helping stream bank erosion, and we've provided funding so that they can have a well for the cattle so that they can still get water. So we've done a lot of great things like that because a lot of the family-owned farms in the Falls Lake Basin, we feel like they're also stewards of the environment in their own way. So we want to work with them, and so it doesn't always have to be an empty forest. And I would also mention that. Anytime we have these large projects that we've had recently, Beaver Dam Slopes is the one that we did recently with the Triangle Land Conservancy. They have all intentions of making that a nature park. There was already something there called Three Bears Acres that they ended up shuttering, but their plan, and they have a track record of doing that. And another one of our projects called Brumley in Orange County, there's now trails out there. So they can do that, and they have the means to do that. So that's one of the keys to this is, traditionally it's just, preserve some land and then put up no trespassing signs, and that's the end of it. And that's still valuable to us from a water quality standpoint. But if we can get even people from Raleigh to go into these areas and get to hike around them, we think they'll value them more and support the program more.
That's great. So I guess my follow-up question is there any way that we can like slap their hands whenever there's something that they do that doesn't align with our protecting our drinking water? Because I think there's been a lot of articles that have come out. I've worked with Samantha Kropp from Sound Rivers as well as some of the Durham City Council members, and it's just a lot of disregard of the Falls Lake drinking watershed as well as just like some rezonings and developments that are really potentially harmful to the water. So I know, like, we're good stewards on our end, but we contain so little of the actual watershed itself. And so I just wonder if there's like a process for like, hey, Durham, don't do that, or just like calling them out more.
That's above my pay grade. Yeah, I really think, honestly, the best way to do that is through the UNRBA. Councilmember Harrison is there. She talks to her counterparts in Durham and other counties, and you. I mean, and city council people. I think that's probably the best way to do it from a political standpoint. I don't think me tweeting something out on our city account is going to be very effective. So.
I was gonna do that, so that's funny that you say that.
Thanks, Ed.
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's see. Any other questions? I know we just have a couple more minutes. And if there are any questions for Forrest as well while he's here, I just want to give a shout out. Thank you so much, Forrest, for leading the UNRBA and bringing together all of our different communities, all the counties, municipalities that touch this watershed, because we do have to work together and we do have to provide each other with education, information, a little bit of nudge, wink, help us out, because we're all in this together at the end of the day. And you know, we depend on each other. We're a region that, you know, needs water supply from one another. So I think, you know, it's an imperative that we all take care of the water together. So definitely big thanks to your team and
Sure.
Raleigh Water, and all that we do. I know it goes a long way.
Thank you.
So I don't think we need to vote on this or
We
anything.
probably just need to report it out with no
Report
action.
out. Do I need to make a motion?
I move that we report this out with no action.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All right, that was unanimous. Thank you all.
So you'll need to adjourn.
Oh, yes, okay. And with that, I'm sorry, one thing before we adjourn. I did just want to note, and I'll bring this up at our next city council meeting, there has been a request from folks in District D around the Athens Drive Community Library. So there is a plan for it to move outside of the high school, and there's a Wake County Library bond that's going to pay for a new spot. And there are several comp plan, different policies and actions that relate to library siting and coordination on libraries in Raleigh. And so I would like to bring this to a discussion about siting at our next GNR meeting, but I believe that's something I need to actually bring up at council.
Yes, but also I'm thinking we probably need to make sure we have information from the county.
Yeah, and I have been talking to some county folks there. I'm just curious to talk about it from the city perspective. What would be our goals? As you know, ultimately it's a county decision.
Right.
But if we have some intent around where we'd like to see the site, I think that would be helpful, because there are a lot of options out there, and they're going to probably move quick if the bond gets passed.
Right, and I have residents with some library concerns
Okay.
too, but
Yeah,
let's talk.
Talk more. Yeah,
Yeah, let's talk.
I don't want to make any action
Because it is
today.
their bond, so I want us to be careful that we don't overreach into another governing body's jurisdiction.
Yeah.
And everything. So I think if it's just based on our code and what our code says, that's fine, but it's kind of hard if we don't know the location. Like, do we know where they're looking to
There are
put it?
potential sites that have been
Okay.
floated. Yeah.
So I also take direction from
No, so procedurally, you're right that there would need to be a request at the table to refer
Right.
an item. I did just want to make sure that the committee was aware, and the chair, there will be an item in the Friday letter this week. There have been some community questions about opportunities at the Athens Drive site. So there will be a memo, comprehensive memo coming to the council with information about land and water conservation fund limitations on that site that would probably preclude use of that site for that purpose. So there will be a detailed memo coming to the council on Friday that may help inform your discussions as well.
Great. Yeah. I'll wait until I get our next council meeting to bring it up, but we can talk in the meantime.
definitely.
Yeah. All right. With that, I'm going to adjourn the Growth and Natural Resources Committee.